author, radio host, Alan Watt, CutIntoTheMatrix.com, joins us. And sometime I ought to read his bio. It is very, very interesting. He's also a musician and published a lot of philosophy and poetry under pseudonyms for much of his life. He was heavily involved in the music industry as a singer, songwriter, performer, involved in folk music, blues, pop, rock, and even classical. He's also known for his session guitar work. He has played with some of the most well-known artists and groups. Born in Scotland, he watched the subtitles of politics and media as they guided. He watched the subtleties of politics and media as they guided the population of the UK covertly into the European amalgamation. And I was just talking to Alan. It's funny, he's got allergies or sinus like I do today, so we're like the dynamic duo here but I doubt he'll sound as doltish as I have today. Alan, so much is going on, so much is happening. I said, what's your take on the shooter? And you said, well, I feel like the fool on the hill watching the world spinning around. But really, the fool on the hill isn't a fool. He sees the majesty, the beauty of the world, but also the ugliness, just the incredible spectacle of consciousness that the establishment tries to keep us from opening up to, because then we would be aware and not easily tricked. So they wish to keep us psychically and mentally and spiritually and financially stunted. But I want to get into the Hadron Superconducting Supercollider and the dangers associated with that. And I want to get into 150 human-animal hybrids grown in UK labs. I've got a special report coming out tomorrow on this. Embryos have been produced secretly for the past 3 years, the Daily Mail can reveal. Human cow, human reptoid, reptile, human fish, human frog, amphibian. And but there's something funny here. I remember 15 years ago, because I know I'd been on air a year and a half or so. I remember covering BBC articles about human embryonic chimeras, because they said the only way they could do it was make them part cow, so that they wouldn't have rights, and growing them in the utero of cows. And they were saying that had been done for 5 years in 1996. So it's all, and since then, every year, they say, for 3 years, we've been doing this. For 5 years, we've been doing this. That's the two stories. And it's always done the same. And you'd think Daniel Martin and Simon Cadwell at the Mail would know how to pull these articles up or use a LexisNexis. And then I remember, Alan, I want you to speak to this. In fact, we'll speak to this first and then get into the shooter and the Knights Templar thing and the rest of it that I know you've studied. It's why you're here. That the Washington Post, it was in 2004, I think, or was it 2005? Because I had recently read it in the Washington Post, and about a week later, I was on Ian Punnett's Saturday Coast to Coast AM. Great interview. I loved the interview. Never been invited back on. I need to get Ian Punnett on this show and return the favor, but I'd like to go back on that show. But he would challenge me a lot. And so I'd say, well, this company came out, Protigen, with a corn that grows live HIV virus in it. And he wouldn't believe it, and he'd pull it up and be in the Associated Press and pharmacological corn. And I remember mentioning a Washington Post article about, was it his show or George? But I remember it was around that time. The Washington Post said, yes, there are chimeras, part chimpanzee, human, at big labs in Costa Rica, but you're not allowed to see them. And I think it was Punnett, or maybe it was Nori, but I don't remember. It was like, oh, really? And then I pulled up the article and read it to him. It all blurs at this point. But the issue is, you talk about spider goats, you talk about things like this that have been out for decades. People still don't believe it. And the issue here is, if they're admitting this has been going on for decades now, imagine what's really going on. And so why are they now introducing this to the public? I mean, this is H.G. Wells' The Island of Dr. Moreau, with the humanoid creatures demanding their rights. Wells, over 100 years ago, wrote about atomic bombs and basically World War, and that how the UN would come out of that. And of course, he was a top futurist and predictive programmer that Alan talks a lot about. So more and more, it does look like they've got a lot of secret technologies and things, and they may not be 30 years advanced as they admit they are in their technological systems. It may be 50, 100. We don't know. I mean, more and more I realize we are basically in a matrix because we're physically here, but through the eyes, through the olfactory, through touch, through everything, we take in this data, and the modern civilization is a false reality. It is a artificial habitat that we're in, and they're just bringing us into deeper phases. And Alan Watt is our guest. That's my preface. Alan, break down what we're facing here.
Yeah, you're quite right, actually. They do give you a reality for the mass population, and it's an antique reality. We think we're on the cutting edge, and the media, of course, is there to reinforce that and give out little tidbits. Oh, we're trying to explore this and trying to explore that. One day we eventually hope to do this, and we believe it all, you see. And in reality, as you say, a much higher level of reality is the true cutting edge. We don't even know how high that goes. We know it's way above top CIA level, when in the 1950s they had solid-state circuitry. They had little gizmos you'd put in your pocket that could turn someone's heart off, basically. And they used them, too. And Nick Bagage came out and showed some of this stuff and talked about it as well. So we are really in the past. And that's how you can at the top. That's how you can control the future. You plan the future. You bring it in, and you feed the public predictive programming a little bit and a little bit at the time. You must also do social changes and dehumanize the people. And dehumanization is a big, big part of this agenda, because Julian Huxley, who was the CEO of UNESCO, the first one of UNESCO, he did say that in his books, that they'd have to knock man off his pedestal as being supreme on the planet, bring him down to the level of animals. Now, once you start to think of yourself as an animal, and again, you get all these nature programs, all the green programs telling you, well, you're just another animal amongst animals, and you have no more rights than any other animals. And then you have to go into the further dehumanization of the destruction of the old cultures where families normally had children. That was the whole point of them. And now, of course, we don't even have so much that. So we've seen abortion rackets going on. We're now seeing body parts sold across the world. We are a going business, all of us. We're a going business for someone.
And they're teaching us, with the gladiatorial events and all of it, to dehumanize ourselves and to see beauty as ugly and ugliness as beauty, and to just wallow, because a human would be shocked by the disgrace and the indignity of humans being spliced with animals, and would be concerned for these poor creatures. But because they're part human, they have no right. When you torture a monkey, people will burn down your business. But with the transhumanist environmentalist, there is a giggling sacrament in trampling humanity, because they really fear the power of humanity. So it's important for them, the predator class, to trample it and to hike their leg on it, and to turn it into a servile, gibbering religion where the slaves revel in their own destruction.
That's pretty well it, actually. Dehumanization. With dehumanization comes depersonalization. When you lose your identity of who you are in flux. When you're in flux, of course, the massive propaganda machine comes in, takes you over, and then you flow along with the new think, as it's called. You always new think. And so we've been programmed like this for such a long time now. Now, recently, too, we've seen the big push for euthanasia. That was the next nail in the coffin. And then people, and they keep the pulse on the public now with the internet. They know what we're thinking, what we're chatting about, what we're worried about. And so they can tell when we're ready for the next step of it. Now, I've got books going back from scientific journals going back 20, 30 years when they were talking, and I've got one here, actually. It's the future of mankind and the planet, and top names in it, of course, and it shows you them breeding the public for different functions, just like Plato talked about in the Republic, only a bit more advanced. And they said we can create men who eventually will be divers. They'll have gills like fish, and they can go down and they can weld the legs on the big platforms at sea for oil and do that kind of stuff. In other words, they're going to make purpose-made humans or semi-humans for the particular job they're designed to do. And that's what it's all about, is designer humans for specific tasks. Rather, you see, we are supposedly, according to high sociology today, we are the useless eaters now. We're industrial. They don't need us. We're almost post-war once the Middle East is standardized into the world system.
And then they have the predictive programming with movies like X-Men that show you everybody mutating, and then how they're the poor groups whose rights aren't taken care of. And now they're going to come out with more and more of these clones, these replicants, and then the government's going to give them rights and protect them, and then basically use them against the rest of us. Those that won't buy into all the new technological augmentation that are really backdoor systems for them to hack the brain, because there is no firewall, as the Pentagon has said. They'll be sequestered like Amish, but then our children raided and taken. I mean, it is a charnel house of trampling and being trampled upon, as O'Brien tells Winston, that is being entered here. And just notice how they're now calmly saying, yes, we're splicing humans with animals. I mean, they're just telling you, but it's secret and you're not allowed to see them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's no doubt about it. And most folk, really, I kid you not, most folk today who haven't had an original thought in their heads, they like the mainstream media, they won't have a thought on this. They'll not be hot nor cold. They'll just be, oh, well, that's science for you. That's progress, by the way. That's what science always tells you, is progress. And they'll go along with it, never thinking about the implications of where it's all to go. But make no doubt about it, this system is not about a new world order. There's lots of stages of coming new world orders in societies and systems already on the books. And we're just seeing the next step of purpose-made humans for specific functions, and you don't need the silly humans anymore with their limited capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, you'll have a sex slave who looks like Marilyn Monroe and even has her DNA, but she'll be 1% squid, so she has no rights. Calls are coming up. We're going to get into Alan Watt's view on the situation in Oslo, Norway, now being used to call for crackdowns on the internet, free speech, the Second Amendment and gun ownership. It is really, really obvious what's going on here. And this guy, now we learn, Norway Nazi was on drugs. Maniac took substances to make him strong. We're going to get more into that. Alan Watt, it is so fundamental. It is such a huge issue to sit here and talk about how we're living in an antique reality. That's a great way of putting it. That there is a breakaway civilization, that the establishment has written white books, white papers on all of this for decades, that the cloning is much more advanced. I mean, they admit, oh, yeah, we kept it secret from you in England. We're splicing humans with everything. They don't worry. They don't have rights because they're part spider, they're part. I mean, this is so incredible that they, for at least 20 years, have been growing humans in cows that are part cows, so that the cow doesn't reject them to then harvest their organs. I mean, again, that was in BBC 15 years ago, and they said that had been going on for 5 years secretly. Now, this is what they admit they're doing. From your research, Alan, how advanced is it? Because the word I've gotten from a physician and others that have treated heads of state is that they're already staging their deaths. And that it's not just Ken Lay that went to Paraguay, right before he was about to be sentenced, or after he'd been sentenced but turned himself in, that this is going on. But, I mean, undoubtedly, there's a lot of secret technology. From your research, how much more advanced is it? Or do we have no idea?
I think from the clues of the past, that's where you go on. And they're probably at least 200 years ahead of where we are. When you look into the writings even of Mary Shelley, for instance, Shelley was, her husband, the poet, was a member of the high societies. At that time, they clouded themselves under secret societies and masonry and so on. But in reality, at the very top of that, there was pure science there. And they were given access to the sciences of the time. And she didn't come up with her idea of a Frankenstein, a human being put together by body parts by herself. It was because she was in with the groups that were actually discussing this, and maybe some who were actually trying to do it at the time. And really, they're so far ahead that it boggles the mind. As I say, in the 50s, before we even had the transistor radio, they had the CIA, as Nick Biggs showed on television. He showed the equipment which could beam a thought into your head, or a sound or music into the middle, the center of your head, on line of sight. So it could go for miles if you were high enough on a hill. You could literally pick your target and do it then. It was more than voice to skull. And but it also, these things also had the capability of interfering with the basically the wave that comes, the pulse for your heart. It originates in the brain.